Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site taking a look at some of the really cool rare firearms in their reference collection. This is essentially it's the Springfield Armory's technical reference collection, started in the 1860s. Springfield Armory did a majority of U.S. official small arms development through up until the Vietnam War. Anyway, it is today a National Historic Site, and they have a really cool museum on site, and they still have the original reference collection. So today, specifically, we're taking a look at the rifle that is the origin of Armalite. This is the AR-1, or Parasniper. Now, Armalite does not start with Eugene Stoner. Armalite actually starts, well, this project, which doesn't begin as Armalite, this project begins in 1952 with two brothers-in-law, Charles Dorchester and George Sullivan. By the way, Sullivan, no relation to the James Sullivan, who would later work for Armalite. So Dorchester and Sullivan, they're brothers-in-law. This Sullivan is, in fact, the chief patent attorney for the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation at the time. The two of them are both into firearms, and they think it'd be a really cool idea to make an ultra-light precision bolt-action rifle for military or civilian use, specifically one using the still somewhat exotic materials that they are experienced with from the aircraft industry. A lot of aircraft industry stuff is, yeah, it's common knowledge and it's in wide use for aircraft, but it hasn't really transitioned over into small arms manufacturing. Small arms is still blued steel and walnut. Well, Sullivan and Dorchester want to consider making it out of things like foam, fiberglass, and aluminum, like you would do with aircraft. So in 1952, they form a company called SF Projects. It's a company, but it's also just founded in Sullivan's garage on Hollywood Avenue in Los Angeles, of all places. And they start working on making their super light sniper rifle. Originally, they use a Remington 722A action, receiver and bolt. It's essentially just a modernized Mauser 98 system, as are many. They start with an aluminum barrel, which may sound like a really bad idea. It was, in fact, a really bad idea. They would shortly thereafter, they would move to a lined barrel, where it's a composite with an aluminum outer structure, but a stainless steel barrel liner inside to give it a little more actual strength. They make stocks that are essentially just a shell full of molded hard shell foam, and they come up with a really, really light rifle. This thing comes in under 6 pounds with a scope and all of its, complete, ready to shoot under 6 pounds, under 5 3/4 pounds for some of the versions that they made. Now, how does this operation become Armalite? Well, Sullivan and Dorchester are tied into the aircraft industry, of course, with Sullivan's work for Lockheed. And as it turns out, the head of the Fairchild Aircraft Company, a guy named Richard Boutelle, is both a fanatical gun guy, and Fairchild is looking to expand some of its operations and diversify a bit. And they convince Boutelle to have Fairchild purchase SF Projects, and they rename it Armalite. It becomes the Armalite Division of Fairchild Aircraft. They bring in Eugene Stoner, who they've worked up this nice relationship with based on originally meeting at the range where they're both prototyping, or they're testing out early prototype firearms, and voila, you have Armalite. Now, before we go too much farther, let's go ahead and take a closer look at our Parasnipers here. We have one of the slightly later Parasnipers built on an FN receiver, and one of the early ones built on a Remington 722 receiver. It really is remarkable just how light these rifles are. Now, this is one of the early examples made on a Remington receiver, so model 722, and it still has its Remington serial number there in the 350,000 serial number range. You can see the change in finish here from the steel receiver to the aluminum external profile of the barrel. This is a barrel with a steel liner and an aluminum exterior. And it is chambered for .308 Winchester. So by the time these rifles were going into production, before they're going to actually get tested by the US military, they do switch over from cartridges like .257 Roberts to the new, what is being adopted as the new NATO standard military cartridge, .308 or 7.62 by 51. And over on the right side of the barrel, we have the original Armalite marking, Hollywood, California. Mechanically, this really is just a Mauser action, 5 rounds, bolt action, nothing particularly exotic to see there at all. They do equip the rifles with muzzle brakes. They have a couple different examples. We have one here at Springfield that has its muzzle device missing. This particular one has a 2-slot brake like that. We also have one here that does not have so much a muzzle brake as a flash hider, very reminiscent of something like the M14 flash hider, which I guess would make sense, being put into US military testing, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is one of the examples manufactured on an FN receiver. It's still in 308, but it has a much lower serial number. And we will actually go ahead and pull this one apart so you can see the inside. Taking it apart is really easy. We just have 2 screws here that connect the trigger group up through the receiver, or through the stock to the receiver. And then the front end of the receiver is held in place by this ring around the barrel, which is connected to the sling swivel on a screw. There we go. We can just pop the action out of the stock. If we take a look inside the stock, you've got a very standard magazine well and follower. This is a long action magazine that has been shortened up for a short action cartridge like the 308. I'm going to leave this in there. That's kind of, something's adhering it to the stock in the front. You look inside the stock, this is just solid foam. They've given it a sort of a crackle paint finish on the outside. It gives it a little bit of texture. But that's all there is to it. A recoil pad, a no shock recoil pad, which would definitely be a nice thing to have on there. FN 1954 production receiver, made in Belgium. And what is, I suspect, a Belgian-made trigger to go along with it. The trigger itself is marked Jaeger there. There's your Belgian proof marks on the receiver. Again, it's just a Mauser 98 receiver. Early, 1950s style of scope mount. It's a 4-power scope. It's just basically thumb tightened on there, front and back. Little wrap around rings. And then this is, got a little bit of grunge in there. This is the ring that locks the front end down into the stock. There you go. That's all there is to the AR-1 Parasniper. The Parasniper is a rifle that was marketed both to the military and to the civilian areas. This is certainly, in theory, it's a great rifle for someone who's out doing any sort of long distance hunting. If you're going up in the mountains, if you're going to be hiking a long ways with your rifle, this thing's fantastic. These weigh, they feel like they weigh even less than 6 pounds. Extremely lightweight rifles. I'm sure they're a bit unpleasant to shoot because of that lightweight, but man, fantastic to carry. So I can absolutely see the potential civilian interest in these. And that's one of the things that Armalite is pursuing. They're also, of course, pursuing their military role. They're hoping for paratroopers, air mobile troops, people who need lightweight guns. In July of 1955, Armalite convinces the US military to actually do some official testing on the AR-1. So they provide a couple of rifles. That, by the way, is why these rifles are here at Springfield. They were tested by the US military and then kept by the US military. These initial rifles didn't do very well in testing. They had both accuracy and reliability problems. And it's not great when your bolt-action rifle has reliability problems. Well, Armalite does a little bit of tinkering, and they get a second test by the US military starting in October of '55. They provide 5 more rifles to the Army. Army tests them at Aberdeen Proving Grounds between October '55 and the spring of 1956. And in a portent of things to come for Armalite, the rifles still don't do all that well. They appear to have fixed the reliability issues. Hopefully that would have been something fairly simple to deal with. But there are still accuracy problems. And Aberdeen's assessment is that the composite multi-material barrel is responsible for the accuracy problems. When the barrels start to get hot, which doesn't take very long because of how light they are, the different layers in the barrel start to separate and potentially delaminate. Now, Eugene Stoner is working at Armalite at this point, not so much on the bolt-action rifles, but on his semi-automatic rifle, the gun that's going to become the AR-10. Stoner really doesn't like the composite barrel plan. He argues against it fairly vociferously, but he's shut down. Sullivan and Dorchester are still more senior, more important in this company than he is. Sullivan in particular really likes the composite barrel ideas. They've actually named their aluminum alloy Sullalloy or Sullalloy after Sullivan, and they go forward with composite barrels on the AR-1 and the early AR-10s. And as we know, one of the fatal problems for the AR-10 in US military testing was when its composite barrel gave up the ghost and a round blew out the side of one of those AR-10s in testing. And it all is traceable back to the exact same problems that they had on the AR-1, the Parasniper, where when that composite barrel gets hot, the layers can start to delaminate. It was never really a safety issue on the bolt-action rifles because they don't have the rate of fire capacity to get hot enough to have a catastrophic failure, but you do get compounding stresses in the barrel as they heat up, and the accuracy really takes a hit. That problem gets magnified, like it goes up an order of magnitude with a select fire gun like the AR-10. So ultimately, with the poor Army reception, these guns, that's pretty much the end of the road for the Parasniper. Armalite moves on to other projects that it thinks are going to be more viable, namely the AR-10. And well, that of course is a story for another video, but it does come surprisingly close to American military adoption and does get adopted by a bunch of other countries around the world. Now, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. A big thanks to the Springfield Armory National Historic Site for giving me access to some of these extremely rare rifles out of their reference collection. They do have a pretty cool museum here on site with a whole bunch of prototypes, mostly US military stuff. That is definitely worth your time to stop in at if you happen to find yourself in Springfield, Massachusetts. Thanks for watching.